Andrew, mate. That's Australian for friend. Highly technical term.
Yeah, right.
I think you mentioned before how the census data in New Zealand has accommodated iwi identification.
Yeah.
Would you please go through that again, as we have people who are relevant to this discussion about how the Australian Bureau of Statistics could accommodate our affiliations to country, to language, to, clan, etc. So would love to hear again what you have to say about that.
Previously, there was a listing of iwi, some tribes that were included in the official data, but to get on there was a supposed hierarchy. Onto that list, there was like a hierarchy of approval that, for some reason, had to go through some higher level so-called tribal confederations, which meant that some of the smaller groupings missed out. This time around, Statistics New Zealand opened the door and invited tribal entities to apply, to be listed on this kind of categorisation of officially recognised tribal groupings for official statistical purposes. Now that is quite an important distinction. It is for official statistical purposes. It didn't necessarily mean that they actually had any other official role, but at least data would be able to be collected about them. And in order to do that, they had to say that they had a defined tribal territory, eponymous ancestor, marae, either built or unbuilt, and some certain criteria, fairly basic criteria that they actually had to meet. And it worked pretty well, and it was assessed by Indigenous people. The only non-Indigenous person in the room making that was the person taking the notes, which was a nice change. And so as a result, a whole new group, a much larger number of tribal entities are now going to be recorded in the official statistics. That is important for next year's census because Statistics New Zealand is hoping for a 70% digital census, ABS notwithstanding. And so that then means that a lot of those menus are actually going to be pull down menus. So they're hoping to get quite a large response, improved response in tribal counts on the basis of that. The paper forms will have, they'll just have to scan that data and recode it. But in terms of moving to digital, it hopefully increase significantly the quantity and quality of the tribal data collected in New Zealand. But it was an opt-on process.
Andrew, can I ask, how have they managed multiple affiliations?
It's fine.
You can, yeah.
Yeah, not an issue.
Yeah, good.
There are lots of tribes, like how many?
We can't hear you, Fadwa.
Sorry, I said were there lots of tribes, like how many?
Oh, yes.
Came up? Yeah.
Tahu, can you help an old fella out here? Yeah, there's at least 140. Right.
Well, we would have several thousand.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I mean...
And part of that was, they're also regionally categorised too, to actually help people sort of find. So if you didn't know specifically what your tribe was, you could actually put what's that kind of region, right? And we're using that now as part of the structure of some of the pull-down menus to facilitate responses.
So, Lisa, you must be thinking, well, this is a great question to put to the prescribed bodies corporate.
It is. I think it's worth having a conversation with the native title community in terms of how reliable and verifiable are the boundaries that have emerged out of the native title process. So because for lots of reasons. So there are some groups that have had to, for various reasons, put in multiple claims. When we look at a native title map, you'll see, there's 330 determinations. There are only 170 PBCs, so we know there's mismatch there. So one group is putting in a number of claims, or you get experiences like Yalanji where they've got two very distinct PBCs, very distinct representative structures based on an accident of representation in the claim process. So Yalanji's kind of split over two organisations. So there are problems with that data. So the idea of having a process that is mediated for data purposes, and I was pleased to see the idea that the overlaps weren't a problem, because what you were wanting to end up with was the data for a group, not an aggregated data from that. So that actually could solve some of the hurdles that we might see in that resolution of that question.
And part of that is to be, part of that resolution is to be really specific about the purpose of that data. So the purpose of collecting tribally based data about people or tribally based data about a place isn't to make comparisons between the tribes, right? Especially, and statistically, that's actually really tricky because of the extent of overlap. But by making that very explicit in the first instance, that was one of the ways that tribes became much more confident that this wasn't going to be misused. But that said, when we're doing the geography, the GIS geography data cutter, we're not going to trust that, and we're actually going to say that those geographies only go into the official statistics system once the protocols have been agreed and signed off by the official statistics agency as to how those geographies will be used.
So I'll just remind all of you that question 4 on our participant feedback form is this. Well, first of all, there's a statement. The ABS is reviewing the Indigenous identification question for the 2021 census to possibly include a supplementary question to nominate affiliation to a specific Indigenous nation or language group. Do you have any comments or advice on this issue? So if you fill that in, we'll collate all the feedback and send it back to our contacts in the ABS. But I think this will be an ongoing discussion for some time, so let's hear from other people on the panel, as you wish, on this matter.
Like, I didn't understand when you said it's Stat Canada has to approve these. Is that the idea, or?
Or Statistics New Zealand.
Sorry, Statistics New Zealand. Yeah, sorry.
No, well, they're the data gatherers, right? So and officially, we have a very independent National Statistics Office and government statistician, so everything technically has to have the sign-off. So yes, the approval process was convened by Stats New Zealand, but the people making the decisions were not Stats New Zealand employees.
They were...
Not Statistics New Zealand employees.
They were who?
They were a couple of people from other government agencies, Māori data people. We had a person representing an organisation that collects data from the electoral process about iwi affiliation. Had the leading advocate, the leading exponent of tribal data in the country, who used to be the private secretary to the Minister of Statistics, and the quote, her name was Kiri Kowhai Makaere, and we've seen that quote that Tahu presented, that was her quote, and a data geek like myself, and a few other people. But it was not a internal Statistics New Zealand process.
I'd like to add that this is a perfect opportunity to put in place some Indigenous data governance. I think the model that you've got in New Zealand could possibly work here with all those safeguards in there. But for the ABS, please don't think this is something to go to your community advisory group with. This is something that's much bigger, and you need to actually engage and have governance and partnership with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples, communities and organisations to make these sorts of decisions and make these sorts of changes, and how those data that are collected can and will be used.
Does anybody want to say anything?
Well, I guess I should.
Probably.
Probably the first thing to say is that there's been a number of assumptions made, and the first is that the census is the best vehicle to get the information that you want for the purpose that you want. And without, foreshortening any discussion, but it probably isn't, because it has to serve an enormous range of masters, it has to do an enormous range of things, limited attention span of participants, and so on and so on. So notwithstanding 140 categories in New Zealand, that's quite a lot in a census. It's quite a lot because it's almost certain has to be done scanned, so handwritten or typed and scanned, and there's a whole stack of operational issues. Again, not saying we wouldn't do it. Thousands is going to be quite difficult. There's some other things you need to understand about the census. The government says what goes on census, not the Australian Bureau of Statistics. We make recommendations, and most of our recommendations are made on operational issues. It cannot be 6 hours long. It cannot ask for a whole range of things because the concept may be ill-defined and the answers you get back might just be inconsistent. Having just listened this afternoon and disappointed that I wasn't able to be here for the whole conference now with the discussion, this may be an area where the Indigenous data sovereignty really does need to step in and for the Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander community to own this piece. So that through community groups you might want to get a better understanding of your communities and your people, and that combined with census data or other data may give you a fuller picture. And so, having said that, the next piece is that formal census consultation will begin at the end of this financial year after we've finished the Australian Marriage Law Postal Survey, which finishes fairly soon. And there will be an opportunity to consult. And again, I don't think I'm very brave to say that about the last thing we would do in the ABS is decide what community groups to use to enumerate Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. We would not be that brave. But as statisticians, we just wouldn't do it because we'd probably get it wrong. And which means that then all the effort that we put in and the data that we produce will not be of use to the community that needs it. So I think that's probably captures those initial thoughts.
So why do you have the question around the ABS?
Can you speak into the microphone, please, Fadwa? You have a very faint voice.
Right. Can you explain why you're discussing, or there is a question around changes to or addition to the Indigenous status question in that paper that you just read?
The comment I'll make on that is that that's an informal statement. Informal. There is not a formal piece of work being conducted in the ABS to review that question any more than as we do with the census, we review the census. And there's been some ideas bandied around between individuals and between agencies that to celebrate, commemorate 50 years of including Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the census, so was it 71, first census after 1967,
Yes.
that we might do something in particular with this census to bring attention to that 50-year period. This additional Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander identification was brought up. It was brought up like that. That would be a good idea. And then you start to go through it and you look at all the issues and it may be the right idea. And I think, we're open. It may be the right idea. It has to go through. But again, you wouldn't want to compromise the census or the information you get from census to accommodate something like that when something else could be done. So very much and more in the ABS, our strategy is to use more and more different data sets, to use administrative data, census data, survey data. As I said before, this again may be a topic best addressed through another mechanism, but tied together at the national level through some of the work that we do in the ABS.
Very interesting. Very interesting. I tend to agree with you. It's not a census question.
Well, I don't think it's purely being raised for symbolic reasons, because for all of the discussion we've had about the challenge that traditional owner groups have in collating data about the traditional owner group, and that's that's really the push behind having something that goes beyond where you live and where you're born, and whether you're Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander or both. That doesn't, as we talked about before, the local government boundaries are then the only thing you've got to go by to actually filter that data for trying to work out any correlation of the census data to traditional ownership. So if we're looking at some of the challenges that the government is facing around how do we empower traditional owner groups to be involved in setting priorities or making decisions for themselves, we can do that with resident communities, but we can't necessarily do that with census data for traditional owner groups. So that's it's not purely symbolic, and I think the challenges are real, and it may be that it's just not possible. I don't think if you worked out what the question was and how to manage it, it's not going to bring down the census, because most Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people will either be able to say, do it in 30 seconds, or say, I don't know. They won't necessarily be taking the time to do the research to answer the question. So I think the difficult bit will be working out whether it can work. I think if a question can be designed that would work, I don't think it's going to bring down the time that it takes to fill in a census.
So
Can I just add to that? Must stress that we're not planning on this to be the exclusive source of tribal identity data. The thing about the census is that it's this hugely expensive, comprehensive beast, and we want to make it as good as we possibly can for us, right? That's why we're engaging in this. But apart from that, we also, tribal identity data has been collected in the education sector. Now that's really useful because it's outside of a 5-year cycle for us. Maybe, but in a linked data environment, there's also an opportunity for births, deaths and marriages to start collecting that data.
Yep.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not a single-shot solution. It is just, let's make this whole damn system of official statistics work as well as we can for us.
Okay, just quickly then, big difference between Aotearoa and Australia is that, the level of racism in Aotearoa is, 1 out of 10. In Australia, it's 9 out of 10. So, just even raising this issue creates huge problems for us. You have one language, with some dialectal differences. We have 120 spoken languages, and we don't have a treaty. We have a native title process and other processes, and there's a long way to go with this discussion. Anyway, can I move on to the key issues? The other key issues, sorry. Capacity building, workforce, storage and stewards of community data, sustainability, ongoing funding. So we've got some big challenges. Pick a topic, any topic.
I'd like to just go back a little bit even further than that and sort of say that, look, Indigenous data sovereignty is a concept, and it's about developing a collectivity rather than with a place for universities and academics to have input in that, a place for community to have input in that, a place for community organisations to be all part of that collectivity. I think we still need to start thinking, capacity building, workforce, all of these things are really important, but I think it's really important that we start the process of developing that collectivity as number one, and then second, start putting around the ideas of what the guiding principles of Indigenous data sovereignty would be, so that it doesn't take off in a dozen different directions and that we lose the concept, actually just gets washed out, so that anything that's got an Indigenous advisory group is called Indigenous data sovereignty. We need to be really clear about what it is, and then under that banner we can move to these other things around capacity building, and I think we could do that fairly quickly if we had the funding. So I guess that's my piece, to say, let's start, we're only at the beginning, let's start right and move out as we can.
That was worked really well for us. We spent a huge amount of time developing a charter that went up on our website, and when in doubt, refer to the charter, right? And it also, that then became the public document that, whenever we got any inquiries, we said, go and read the charter, right? Especially in an academic environment.
I suppose, can I sort of go on a bit from where we've both gone on? I'm from the Productivity Commission. Catherine, so a little bit different. I actually say I agree with you both. And I think when I looked at the topics around capacity building and workforce, I think they're broader than data. They encompass everything. And it's something that one of our reports that we put out, the Overcoming Indigenous Disadvantage report, please don't worry too much about the title and come back to that space in a couple of years. But we have 4 success factors that we talk about in the report. And just to note them really briefly, cooperative approaches between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Australians and governments, community involvement, bottoms up, good governance, and that includes government governance, not just Indigenous governments, but government governance, and ongoing government support. And they were in our most recent report in 2016. They were in our 2014 report. They were in our 2011 report. These are not new things. I think what's interesting is that the implementation part is where things tend to fall over. So I think there's a lot of the words have been around, everybody knows, but the doing part is the part that's, I suppose, the bit that I grapple with a little bit. I was at a conference earlier this week up in Sydney that I think a few people were at, and Will Sanders said something that resonated with me, where he said, over the past 15 years, I'm feeling more positive in the past 12 months than I have in the past 15 years in this space. And I think I'd probably cautiously agree with that. But the other thing too is that there seems to be a lot of threads that are coming together. So I look at like the El Begonia unit, the data units that are happening in empowered communities, the work that's going on through PM&C with Closing the Gap, the new function that the Productivity Commission got through the budget earlier this year that we haven't started yet because we're waiting on a legislative change around Indigenous evaluation. There's a whole lot of threads coming together, and it's almost like a perfect storm. And this is another part of it, I think, with the Indigenous data sovereignty. And it's how you fit that together so that everything keeps moving forward, because I think you're going to need all of the different elements to come together to make this work.
One of the tricks to this, and I think one of the values of having, as Maggie said, that community that moves forward from this and works on things like the principles and potentially on training and capacity building, is that when the question is asked by government, you want the answer to be obvious. It's one of those things that you don't want them to necessarily come up with the options or the answers. So having that groundwork done in this period where there's so many explorations going on, I think that could be incredibly valuable. I too think that there is going to be opportunities open to be taken over the next 2 years. And Ian talked about, 6 months for a number of these discussions around the COAG framework and the data management, and then, a 2-year cycle before anything's embedded. So there's going to be some immediate pressures to come up with answers, but there's also there is a time frame there that's useful to think about. So I think that's quite useful. In terms of capacity building, I just want to echo what Catherine said about the governance of government, and to not lose sight of the need to build the capacity of public servants to understand when questions like data sovereignty come in front of them, for them not to run away. So building the cultural capability of the public service in relation to their ability to engage with Indigenous concepts and Indigenous ways of expressing what they want, I think, is an ongoing issue. And I'd just like to bring to people's attention that AIATSIS has been rolling out a cultural competency program across the public service over the last 12 months. It's been surprisingly successful. So I think we've just had our 1,000th completion. So that's 1,000 people having completed 10 to 15 hours of cultural competency training, which that's 10,000 hours of cultural competency training that wasn't happening before. But what's been interesting has been the enthusiasm. So I think, again, there is some fertile ground to work with in terms of the energy that is within the public service at the moment to engage with Indigenous issues. So it's been surprising how much positive take-up there has been on that front as well. So there's certainly work we can do, I think, in building things like down the track, things like masterclasses for public servants on what data sovereignty looks like and means. And when they get asked questions about access, you know, what people are actually expecting them as custodians of data to actually do. So that was just one comment I thought it would be useful to make.
I think one of the other things that's really come through clearly here, like that there's data everywhere, and it would be really easy to get overwhelmed with that, but there seems to be a really obvious lack for a safe, culturally safe space for Indigenous data. And I think that would be something that we would be wanting to move on fairly soon, so that people had the opportunity to place data somewhere where they know it is going to be kept safe and where it is only going to be available to the people that should be accessing it. So that's probably something that AIATSIS might be interested in doing, and sort of almost we're sort of tossing around the idea of sort of having your own sort of safe security box in a data vault where the bank has
Well,
got
that
one
already
key.
exists at AIATSIS, which is why AIATSIS is here, and many of us have used the AIATSIS archives for years as a repository. For instance, the Wadaya master files and tapes are all in whatever you call those things. The master files are in AIATSIS.
And digital storage.
I put major collections into AIATSIS, and don't worry, it's safe. You'll never see it again because they're 100 years behind with cataloguing.
That's
So
where I
not
was gonna go
true.
next.
So not true.
That was only half a joke.
No, that's exactly where I was going to go next, to say that it can't be just like a vault. It has to be very interactive, and where a community can be coming in and out and checking on their valuables on a regular basis. And for that, that's going to have to be a big
It is.
infrastructure, both for community and also wherever
It's
the
also
repository
a
is.
change in the concept of an archive. So material that is in AIATSIS at the moment is accessible. There may be protocols in relation to the access, and certainly we're really lucky because our legislation actually provides protections where we can either withhold access to something in the interest of the Indigenous community, or we can provide access to something that might be restricted by a non-Indigenous depositor in the interest of the community. So that's a really useful legislative provision that we have to rely on. The difference in this idea would be that it would be an archive that is effectively not a public archive, and so we're exploring that at the moment, in particular in relation to native title material, to see what that means for us as an archive. And I have to say, in terms of backlogs and digitisation, that digitisation of our material is incredibly important. As you heard, the risk to that material for what is absolutely real. We know that we may only have one opportunity to play some of those tapes, and it will disintegrate in our hands. So, and that knowledge is lost forever. So the digitisation of that material is absolutely imperative. At the same time, we also prioritise access, and that was pretty much the rationale for the increase in our funding last year. That's assisted us to actually bring down those backlogs and to increase the access. So I know that people, have a sort of a historical view of AIATSIS sometimes, but that investment was for exactly that purpose, to make sure that material is available to the Indigenous people who need it. On that, I just want to come back to the idea of custodians. For us, that's exactly the language we use. We are custodians of that information and that knowledge, and it belongs to the people whose knowledge we are looking after it on behalf of. So I just wanted to be really clear that I think regardless of the legal relationship, that has to be the philosophical approach of anyone who is involved in this discussion about Indigenous people's data and archives.
Capacities on the agenda. Is anyone from SAMRI here? I think they've all headed back. Oh, you're here. Apparently you have 2 scholarships, and you have a partnership with the ANU Masters of Epidemiology program that Ray Lovett leads. I asked somebody yesterday to make an announcement about your 2 scholarships in the Masters of Epidemiology course. Do you want to do that quickly? We don't have much time.
Yeah, hi, I'm Claire Bradley. I'm the study coordinator for the Centre of Research Excellence in Aboriginal Sexual Health and Bloodborne Viruses, being led by James Ward from SAMRI. We've currently, a big focus of our CRE is in capacity building. We're collecting we're establishing a 50 ATSIS health data surveillance network, and then using the rest of our 5-year program to build capacity with Aboriginal sexual health workers and other researchers in that sphere. So there's 2 Masters of Epidemiology scholarships that are open. There's also different levels of capacity building support and funding being offered through my program and other opportunities within our team. So if anyone has any particularly good opportunities, please, or thoughts on that matter, please get in touch with me, Claire Bradley at samri.com, and I'm presuming that there'll be some sort of feedback mechanism or networking through this circumstance, but it's pretty easy to look up. I think our website is www.cre-ash.org, and get in touch with me that way as well. So
Send us an email and we'll distribute it to all the participants. We have other information to share as well. And I'm inviting everybody who's got, critical information about the key issues for, designing Indigenous data sovereignty in the future. Just quickly send us a note. We'll just send it out to the participants, okay? Not your life story, just the critical information.
while I've got the mic, I just wanted to say thank you for all the participants in the last 2 days. It's really been a wonderful opportunity for me personally, and in the role that I'm in now, which has a lot to do with collecting data with the use of the ATSIS, or with the participation of the ATSIS, but also trying to build that capacity and give it back, like we're, all the motherhood statements in our application say, it's your data. I'm now in a much better position to be able to actually put legs on that and give that back in a way that's useful for those communities. So thank you for everybody that's participated today and yesterday.
Thanks. I'm not allowed to tell my life story either. Tahu Kukata actually made a very interesting statement, and I'd actually like to ask, particularly Maggie, what can we as non-Aboriginal people do to assist in this space of ensuring data sovereignty?
Yes, it's a good question, and obviously we need our non-Indigenous allies to support this, both the active work and also the advocacy work. The other thing is, what we also need you to do is to allow us to lead. Indigenous data sovereignty has as its core Indigenous leadership, and we need to be leading and bringing forth all of our huge numbers of young, impressive people to this leadership space. So give us all your support, give us all your knowledge, give us all your contacts, tell us how we can get some money, do all of those things and help us to lead.
And Scott, and just while Scott's coming up here, I think the great thing about this conference, and I'm skiting a bit to say that we did design it this way, is that we see how diverse Indigenous data sovereignty is and how many people are doing it across the country. So it doesn't just sit in institutions, it is in communities, it is happening in universities with SAMRI, with partnerships, all kinds of partnerships have been mentioned here. It's huge. So we have got a lot of work to do. That's why the participant survey is important. We need to share what we've learned here. Scott.
Thanks. I introduced myself yesterday, but anyway, I'm from the University of Wollongong. One thing that we're developing in terms of capacity building is a Bachelor of Research, which is going to be commencing in 2019, a 2-year program. The idea of this, Bachelor of Research in Indigenous Health, so the idea is for Aboriginal community members. We've got a grant from the Primary Health Network to work with our local ATSIS around building their capacity, and what we're trying to do is really build up grassroots Aboriginal community workers and who are involved in research, and they can translate what they're doing as part of their work into a degree. So we're trying to build capacity in a professional sense.
Can I just ask before you nick off that, because I'm involved in a couple of other things, and I often get people working in community who keep getting engaged as community advisors when people come into their communities, and they earn a few dollars, but they get nothing else out of it, and they have a real strong desire to actually get some educational qualification and as well as rounding out their skills. So would there be capacity for people to take parts of it without going for the full 2 years?
In terms of a bachelor, I'm not sure. It's a 48 credit point degree, so it's less than your usual degree, and the 12 credit points, potentially 24 credit points could be around projects themselves, but they would have to take a couple of subjects as well as a couple of core subjects.
I might be in touch.
Perhaps we could all collaborate on the masterclass idea. Because as you know, each of us from our institutions have plenty to offer, and the communities can participate as well, and they've got a lot to offer. It was just raised with me by Aaron, Professor Aaron Corn, that Paradisec is a terrific model. It's from the ethnomusicology world.
Linguistics world.
Oh, sorry, linguistics. But don't we put music on Paradisec? Yeah, we do.
In language.
Okay.
Yeah, I should also say that next week it's the Native Nations at the University of Arizona run an Indigenous data sovereignty workshop for credit already. Stephanie Rainey from there is coming out here next week, and myself and Ray and Gwaine are working with her to develop a little bit of an Australian version of that. We're doing it through UTS. We're not sure how it will go yet, but that could be a base as well.
And there is precedent for this, and I'm old enough to remember when they were struggling to develop qualitative researchers, and Flinders University started with a week-long short course, and then they did that with credit, plus a little bit of coursework, and then it became on the books, right? So it can be done.
So, no, great, fantastic. It's just that there's so much to discuss. There's so much we haven't discussed, and I think we're close to the end of our time. Is that right? Yes. And there's no opportunity for me to do the summing up that I threatened to do. I don't think we need a summing up. You will get a report. There'll be videos. They'll come out over time. But we haven't settled on a way to collaborate in the future.
No.
I get the feeling that there's still a lot of competition in the room about who, controls which bit of this and so on. I think we'll overcome that urge to compete in time, especially as we realise the enormity of the task and the diversity of data types and responses to these problems. So it's a huge field, but a big thank you from me to all of you for responding to the request to be on this closing panel, and it's been incredibly interesting, and I thank all of you.